The massive space station called Harmony Point was buzzing with activity that morning. Diplomats from dozens of different worlds had gathered for what everyone was calling the most important meeting in galactic history. The humans were finally going to meet the ethereal Dominion, one of the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. Jake Thompson was running late. Again, the young human diplomat had been wandering the endless corridors of the station for 20 minutes. Completely lost. The map on his tablet made no sense, and every hallway looked exactly the same. He was supposed to be at the Grand Ceremony Hall 10 minutes ago, where the first formal introduction between humans and ethereals would take place. This is just perfect, Jake muttered to himself, jogging down another identical corridor. His dress uniform was getting wrinkled, and he could feel sweat beading on his forehead. The other human diplomats would probably kill him if he ruined this historic moment by being late. Meanwhile, in the ceremony hall, Princess Zara stood perfectly still in the center of the room. Her pale blue skin seemed to glow under the soft lighting, and her elaborate ceremonial robes flowed around her like liquid silver. She had been preparing for this moment her entire life. Every gesture, every word, every breath had been practiced thousands of times. Her advisor, a tall and stern ethereal named Keth, stood beside her with his arms crossed. "Remember, Your Highness," he said in their musical language. "These humans are crude creatures. They have no understanding of proper behavior or respect for tradition. We must show them how civilized beings conduct themselves." The princess nodded slightly, her violet eyes focused straight ahead. She had heard all the stories about humans. They were violent, unpredictable, and completely lacking in social graces. The Galactic Council had warned everyone that humans were dangerous, but they were also incredibly adaptable and had somehow managed to spread across dozens of star systems in just a few centuries. "They will probably grunt and wave their hands around," Keth continued. "Just remember the 17-step formal greeting protocol. Do not let their barbaric behavior affect your composure." Other alien dignitaries filled the room, all whispering among themselves. The crystalline collective representatives stood like living statues, their bodies catching and reflecting light in beautiful patterns. The hive mind's ambassador sat quietly in the corner, occasionally twitching as it received messages from its home world. Everyone was curious to see what would happen when the sophisticated ethereals met the primitive humans. The great doors at the far end of the hall were supposed to open at exactly noon, revealing the human delegation in all their diplomatic glory. The princess had imagined this moment countless times. She would perform the traditional greeting. The humans would stumble through some awkward response, and then they could get through the formal negotiations as quickly as possible. But noon came and went. The doors remained closed. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The other aliens began to whisper louder. Was this some kind of human power play? Were they deliberately showing disrespect by arriving late? Keth's expression grew darker by the minute. "Typical," he hissed. "They cannot even manage to arrive on time for the most important diplomatic meeting in their species' history." Finally, at 12 minutes past noon, the doors burst open. But instead of a formal procession of human diplomats, a single young man came stumbling through, looking completely frazzled. His uniform was wrinkled, his hair was messy, and he was slightly out of breath. Jake looked around the enormous hall, taking in the sea of alien faces all staring at him. This was definitely not how he had imagined making his entrance. He spotted the ethereal delegation immediately. They were impossible to miss, standing in perfect formation in the center of the room like living works of art. And there, in the middle of them all, was the most beautiful being he had ever seen. Princess Zara was nothing like the descriptions he had read in the briefing materials. The reports had made ethereals sound cold and emotionless. But there was something warm and almost vulnerable about the way she stood there, trying so hard to be perfect. Her pale blue skin seemed to shimmer, and her large violet eyes were the most expressive he had ever seen. Jake forgot all about diplomatic protocol. He forgot about the formal greeting he had practiced. He forgot about the hundreds of alien eyes watching his every move. He just walked across the hall with a big, genuine smile on his face. "Hello, cutie," he said when he reached the princess, his voice warm and friendly. "Sorry I'm late. This place is like a maze." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Princess Zara's pale blue skin flushed a deep, vibrant violet, starting from her cheeks and spreading down her neck. Her violet eyes went wide with shock, and for a moment, she forgot how to breathe. The entire hall fell silent. Even the hive mind's ambassador stopped twitching. Keth looked like he had been struck by lightning. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. The other ethereal delegates took several steps backward, as if Jake had just committed some terrible crime. What did you just say?" Keth finally managed to whisper. Jake looked around, suddenly realizing that something was very wrong. The princess was still staring at him with those wide violet eyes. Her skin still flushed that beautiful deep purple color. She looked like she was having trouble standing up. "I said hello," Jake replied, his smile fading as he began to understand that he had made a serious mistake. "And I called her. Oh no, that was wrong, wasn't it?" The princess made a small sound that might have been a gasp or a squeak. She pressed her hands to her burning cheeks, trying to hide the color that was spreading across her face like spilled paint. "Wrong?" Keth's voice rose to a pitch that made several crystal beings in the audience ring like bells. "Wrong. You have just committed the most serious breach of diplomatic protocol in the history of the ethereal dominion. You have insulted the royal family. You have disrespected our entire civilization." But Jake wasn't looking at Keth. He was looking at the princess, who was still staring at him with those incredible eyes. And despite the obvious cultural disaster he had just caused, he couldn't help but notice that she didn't look angry. She looked surprised, confused, maybe even a little pleased, though she was clearly trying to hide it. "Your Highness," Jake said, his voice much more serious now. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. I was just... You're really beautiful, and I guess I forgot where I was for a second." The princess's flush deepened even further, if that was possible. She made another small sound and took a step backward, bumping into one of her own guards. "Nough," Keth roared. "Security, remove this barbarian from the princess's presence immediately." But as the guards moved forward, something unexpected happened. The princess held up one slender hand, and everyone froze. "Wait," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It was the first word she had spoken since Jake had arrived, and it carried the absolute authority of someone born to rule. I am not injured. There is no need for violence." She looked directly at Jake, and for just a moment, the formal mask slipped from her face. He saw curiosity there, and something else he couldn't quite identify, something that made his heart skip a beat. However, she continued, her voice growing stronger. "Such behavior is completely unacceptable in formal diplomatic settings. The human delegation will need to provide a formal apology before these proceedings can continue." Keth nodded approvingly, but Jake could see that the princess was still fighting to control the color in her cheeks. She was trying so hard to be proper and dignified, but every time she looked at him, that beautiful violet flush would deepen just a little bit more. "Of course," Jake said, bowing slightly, "I'll make sure to learn the proper protocols. Though I have to say, that blush is absolutely adorable." The princess made a sound like a tea kettle about to boil over and practically ran from the room, her silver robes flowing behind her like liquid starlight. The other ethereal delegates hurried after her, shooting murderous glances at Jake as they went dot. As the hall emptied, Jake stood alone in the center of the vast space, watching the doors swing shut behind the most interesting person he had ever met. He had just caused the biggest diplomatic incident in human history, possibly started an interstellar war, and definitely ruined his career. But all he could think about was the way the princess had looked at him in that one unguarded moment, and how he was absolutely, completely, and utterly determined to see her again. The next morning, Jake woke up to find 3 angry messages on his communication device. The first was from Ambassador Rodriguez, the head of the human delegation, demanding he report to the briefing room immediately. The second was from the Galactic Council's Protocol Office, informing him that a formal complaint had been filed against him. The third was from his own mother back on Earth, somehow already having heard about his little diplomatic mistake through the interstellar news networks. Jake groaned and rolled out of bed. He had spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment when he had looked into the princess's violet eyes. Even now, 12 hours later, he could still picture the way her pale blue skin had flushed that incredible deep purple color. He had never seen anything so beautiful in his entire life. But he was also pretty sure he had just ruined humanity's chances of joining the galactic community. The briefing room was packed when Jake arrived. Ambassador Rodriguez stood at the front, his face red with anger. The other human diplomats sat around the table, all of them looking like they wanted to throw him out the nearest airlock. Thompson. Rodriguez barked as soon as Jake walked in. Do you have any idea what you've done? The ethereal delegation is threatening to leave the station. They're calling your behavior a deliberate insult to their royal family. Some of them are even suggesting we're too primitive to be allowed into civilized space. Jake slumped into an empty chair. I know, sir. I messed up. Big time. Messed up. Dr. Chen, the cultural specialist, looked horrified. Jake, you called the crown princess of the ethereal dominion cutie in front of half the galaxy's diplom. At a course, in their culture, that kind of casual address is only used between intimate family members or romantic partners, though. Jake felt his stomach drop. That's pretty bad, isn't it? Bad? Rodriguez started pacing back and forth. Bad doesn't begin to cover it. We've been trying to arrange this meeting for 5 years. 5 years of careful negotiations, cultural exchanges, and diplomatic protocols, and you destroyed it all with 2 words. Jake looked around the table at his colleagues. These were some of the smartest people humanity had ever produced: linguists, anthropologists, political scientists, and cultural experts who had dedicated their lives to understanding alien civilizations. And he had just made all their work meaningless. What can I do to fix this? Jake asked quietly. Dr. Chen pulled up a holographic display showing ethereal customs and traditions. You need to understand their culture first. The ethereals are incredibly formal people. They have elaborate rules for everything: how to speak, how to stand, how to greet someone based on their social rank. Personal compliments about appearance are considered extremely intimate. What you did was like proposing marriage to her in public. Jake's eyes widened. I what? Not literally, Dr. Chen said quickly, but in their culture, commenting on someone's physical appearance in such a casual way suggests a level of familiarity that would only exist between people who are very close. Very, very close. Meanwhile, in the ethereal delegation's private quarters, Princess Zera was having her own crisis. She sat in her meditation chamber, trying to practice the calming techniques she had learned as a child, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw that human's face. Jake. She had learned his name was Jake Thompson. She had never felt anything like what happened when he called her cutie. It was as if something had awakened inside her, something warm and fluttering that made her skin tingle and her heart race. For 23 years, she had been the perfect princess, calm, controlled, and completely focused on her duties. But one simple word from a human had turned her world upside down. Your Highness. Keth's voice came through the chamber's communication system. The council wishes to speak with you. Zara sighed and stood up, smoothing her robes. She had been dreading this conversation all night. The council chamber was filled with the most senior members of the ethereal delegation. Her father's advisors, military commanders, and cultural experts all sat in a perfect circle, their faces showing various degrees of disappointment and concern. Princess Zara. Elder Thane spoke first. We need to discuss what happened yesterday. Your reaction to the human's behavior was unexpected. Zara kept her expression neutral, though she could feel heat rising in her cheeks again. I was surprised by his breach of protocol. Nothing more, Your Highness, Keth interjected. With respect, you turned the color of a sunset fruit in front of the entire diplomatic assembly. This is not a normal response to surprise. The human clearly had some kind of effect on you, Elder Thane continued. We need to understand what happened so we can prevent it from happening again. Zara looked around the circle of concerned faces. These people had raised her, taught her, and protected her since she was a child. They loved her, she knew that. But they also didn't understand what she was feeling because she didn't understand it herself. I don't know what happened, she admitted quietly. He looked at me, and he smiled. And when he spoke to me, it was like he was seeing me. Not the princess. Not the diplomatic representative. Not the symbol of our people. Just me. The council members exchanged worried glances. This was exactly what they had been afraid of. Back in the human quarters, Jake was deep in study. He had spent the last 6 hours learning everything he could about ethereal culture, history, and social customs. The more he learned, the more he realized how badly he had messed up. But he also learned something else, something that made his heart race with hope. According to the cultural database, ethereals didn't normally experience the kind of emotional response the princess had shown. Their society was built on emotional control and rational thinking. Physical reactions like blushing were rare and usually indicated something significant. Jake stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. Somewhere on the station, there was a beautiful alien princess who had blushed at his simple greeting. A princess who, according to everything he had read, shouldn't have been capable of such a reaction. Maybe, he said to himself, I didn't ruin everything after all. He turned back to his desk and started working on something that would either save the diplomatic mission or get him banned from the galaxy forever. He was going to write a formal apology in the ethereal language, following every single protocol and tradition he could find. And then he was going to find a way to deliver it to the princess personally. 3 hours later, Jake had filled 12 pages with carefully crafted ethereal script. He had looked up every formal phrase, every ceremonial greeting, every possible way to show respect and regret. It was probably the most elaborate apology in human history. But as he read through it one final time, he couldn't help but smile. Hidden in all the formal language and ceremonial phrases was a simple message. He thought she was beautiful. He was sorry for embarrassing her, and he would very much like to see her again. Now all he had to do was figure out how to deliver it, without starting an intergalactic war. The next morning, Jake stood outside the ethereal delegation's quarters, his heart pounding. He had convinced one of the station's maintenance workers to let him know when the princess usually took her daily walk through the botanical gardens. According to this source, she would be passing through the main quarter in exactly 10 minutes. Jake took a deep breath and checked his reflection in the polished wall. He was wearing his best formal uniform, and he had practiced the traditional ethereal greeting posture about 100 times. He was as ready as he would ever be. When Princess Zara appeared at the end of the corridor, Jake's breath caught in his throat. She was even more beautiful than he remembered, gliding down the hallway like she was floating on air. Her pale blue skin seemed to glow in the soft lighting, and her violet eyes were focused straight ahead. Until she saw him, the moment their eyes met, that beautiful purple flush spread across her cheeks again. She stopped walking and stood perfectly still, staring at him with those incredible eyes. Jake took a step forward and performed the most perfect ethereal formal greeting he could manage. He had practiced the 17 different hand gestures, the 3 ritual bows, and the ceremonial phrases until they were burned into his memory. Your Royal Highness, he said in carefully pronounced ethereal, I humbly request your gracious permission to offer my most sincere and profound apologies for my inexcusable behavior yesterday. Princess Zara's eyes widened with surprise. Whatever she had expected, it wasn't this. The human who had been so casual and irreverent the day before was now showing perfect knowledge of their most formal protocols. I have prepared a written apology, Jake continued, holding out the carefully crafted document. I hope you will find it acceptable. The princess took the document with trembling hands, her blush deepening as their fingers accidentally touched. She opened it and began to read, her violet eyes scanning the elaborate ethereal script. As she read, Her expression changed from surprise to amazement to something that might have been delight. Jake had not only apologized with perfect formality, but he had also woven in subtle compliments and references to ethereal poetry. That showed he had spent considerable time studying their culture. 3 days had passed since Jake's formal apology, and Princess Zara couldn't stop thinking about it. She had read his letter at least 20 times, studying every carefully crafted word. The human had learned their language, their customs, their poetry, all just to say he was sorry in the proper way. Nobody had ever done anything like that for her before. She was walking through the station's botanical gardens, her favorite place to think. The artificial sky above showed a peaceful sunset, and exotic plants from dozens of worlds filled the air with sweet scents. It was the one place on the station where she could almost forget about protocols and duties and just be herself. Beautiful. Evening, isn't it? Zara spun around, her heart jumping into her throat. Jake was sitting on a bench about 20 feet away, looking up at the artificial sky. He wasn't looking at her, wasn't even facing her direction, but somehow she knew he was talking to her. "You should not be here," she said, though she made no move to leave. "It's a public space." Jake replied with a gentle smile, still not looking directly at her. "I'm just enjoying the view. These gardens are amazing. We don't have anything like this on Earth." Despite herself, Zara found herself walking closer. "Earth has no gardens? Oh, we have gardens," Jake said, finally turning to look at her. "But they're all natural. Real soil, real weather, real bugs that eat your plants when you're not looking. This is like something out of a fairy tale." Zara sat down on the opposite end of the bench, keeping a proper distance between them. "What is a fairy tale?" Jake's eyes lit up. "You don't have fairy tales? Oh, you're missing out. They're stories we tell children about magical worlds and impossible things. Usually there's a princess who gets rescued by a brave hero, or a poor person who becomes rich through kindness, or someone who finds true love against all odds." "Your people tell stories about princesses?" Zara asked, curious despite herself. "All the time," Jake said, "though most of the princesses in our stories are trapped in towers or cursed by evil witches. They're always waiting for someone to save them." Zara frowned. "That sounds terrible. Why would anyone want to be saved? Are your princesses not capable of saving themselves?" Jake laughed, and the sound made something warm flutter in Zara's chest. "You know what? You're absolutely right. The old stories are pretty ridiculous when you think about it, but lately, we've been telling better ones. Stories about princesses who save themselves, who choose their own paths, who don't need anyone's permission to be amazing. I would like to hear one of these stories," Zara said softly. For the next hour, Jake told her about brave princesses and clever heroes, about worlds where magic was real and love could conquer anything. Zara found herself laughing at the funny parts and holding her breath during the exciting moments. She had never heard stories like these before in her world. Entertainment was formal and educational, designed to teach proper behavior and respect for tradition. "Tell me about your world," Jake said when he finished a particularly exciting tale about a princess who defeated a dragon with nothing but her wit and a handful of magic beans. "My world." Zara looked surprised. "What would you like to know?" "Everything," Jake said simply. "What's it like to grow up as a princess? What do you do for fun? What makes you happy?" Nobody had ever asked her these questions before. Zara found herself talking about her childhood, about the endless lessons in protocol and diplomacy, about the beautiful crystal cities of her home world and the floating gardens that surrounded them. She told him about her younger brother, who was studying to be a scientist instead of a diplomat, much to their father's dismay. "It sounds lonely," Jake said quietly. "Lonely?" Zara looked puzzled. "I am surrounded by people every day. Advisors, teachers, guards, servants. I am never alone. That's not the same thing." Jake said gently, "Being alone and being lonely are different things. You can be surrounded by people and still feel like nobody really sees you." Zara stared at him, feeling like he had just read her mind. That was exactly how she felt, though she had never been able to put it into words. "How did you know?" "Because I've felt that way too," Jake said. "Growing up on Earth, I was always the weird kid who asked too many questions and never quite fit in. Even now, as a diplomat, I sometimes feel like I'm pretending to be someone I'm not. But you seem so confident, Zara said. So comfortable with yourself, Jake smiled. I learned something important a few years ago. The people who matter don't care if you're perfect, they care if you're real. And the people who only care about your perfection don't really matter. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the artificial stars begin to twinkle in the garden sky. Zara felt something she had never experienced before, a sense of connection with another person that went beyond duty or protocol. I have never had a conversation like this before, she admitted. What do you mean? At home. Every conversation has a purpose. We discuss politics, or trade agreements, or cultural ceremonies. Nobody ever asks me what makes me happy. She paused, then added quietly, I'm not sure I know the answer. Jake turned to face her fully. What did you want to be when you were little? Before you knew you had to be a princess? Zara thought for a moment, a small smile playing at her lips. An explorer. I wanted to travel to distant worlds and discover new things. I used to sneak into the palace library and read stories about ancient explorers who mapped unknown territories. Why did you stop? Because princesses do not become explorers, Zara said simply. They become diplomatic representatives and political allies. They marry for the good of their people and raise the next generation of leaders. Says who? The question was so simple, but it hit Zara like a bolt of lightning. What do you mean? I mean, who decided that's what princesses have to do? Who wrote that rule? It has always been this way, Zara said, though her voice was uncertain. It is tradition. It is duty. But traditions can change, Jake said gently. And duty should be about serving your people, not sacrificing your own happiness. What if you could be a princess and an explorer? What if you could find a way to do both? Zara felt that warm flutter in her chest again, stronger this time. You speak of impossible things. Do I? Jake smiled. Your people have technology that can create artificial worlds. You can travel between stars in a matter of days. You can build gardens that make sunset last for hours. But you think it's impossible for a princess to choose her own path. Before Zara could answer, the sound of footsteps echoed through the garden. They both turned to see Keth approaching with 2 guards. His expression thunderous. Your Highness, Keth called out, his voice sharp with anger. You have been missing for over an hour. We have been searching the entire station for you. Zara stood up quickly, her formal mask slipping back into place. I was simply enjoying the gardens, Keth. There is no cause for concern. You were speaking with the human, Keth said, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Jake, alone. Without proper supervision. This is completely unacceptable. We were just talking, Jake said, standing up as well, about stories and gardens and silence. Keth snapped. You have already caused enough trouble with your inappropriate behavior. The princess is not some common citizen you can chat with whenever you please. It's okay, Zara said quickly, seeing the anger building in Jake's eyes. I should return to my quarters. It is getting late. As she walked past Jake, she paused for just a moment. Thank you, she whispered, so quietly that only he could hear, for the stories. Jake watched her go, flanked by guards like a prisoner instead of a princess. The warm feeling from their conversation was replaced by a growing anger at the way she was being treated. The next morning, Jake found himself in Ambassador Rodriguez's office again. This time, the ambassador looked more tired than angry. Jake, Rodriguez said, rubbing his temples. I just received a complaint from the ethereal delegation. They claim you've been harassing their princess. Harassing? Jake's voice rose. I was sitting in a public garden, and she sat down to talk. That's not harassment. According to their customs, it is, Dr. Chen interjected. Unmarried members of the royal family aren't supposed to have private conversations with foreign males. It's considered improper. That's ridiculous, Jake said. She's a person, not a prize to be locked away. That's not how their culture works, Rodriguez said firmly. And if you keep pushing this, you're going to cause a diplomatic incident. That could affect both our species for generations. Jake looked around the room at the concerned faces of his colleagues. He understood their worry. He really did. But he also couldn't stop thinking about the way Princess Zara had looked when she talked about wanting to be an explorer, or the sadness in her voice when she said she didn't know what made her happy. What if she doesn't want to be protected? For me, Jake asked quietly, it doesn't matter what she wants, Rodriguez said. It matters what her people expect, and they expect us to respect their customs, even if we don't understand them. That evening, Jake found himself back in the botanical gardens. He didn't expect to see the princess again after the incident with Geth. She was probably under heavy guard, but he needed to think. And the gardens were the only place on the station that felt peaceful. The royal transport arrived at Harmony Station like a floating palace made of crystal and silver. Jake watched from the observation deck as the massive ship docked, its elegant curves reflecting the light from nearby stars. He had never seen anything so beautiful or so intimidating in his entire life. That's the Emperor's personal vessel, Dr. Chen said, standing beside him. He only uses it for the most important occasions, or when he's really angry. Jake muttered. Ambassador Rodriguez joined them at the window, his face grim. Jake, I need you to stay away from the ethereal delegation while the Emperor is here. No accents, no casual encounters, no botanical garden visits. The situation is already explosive enough. Jake nodded, but his mind was on Princess Zara. He hadn't seen her since their conversation 3 nights ago, when she had taken his hand and told him she wanted to choose her own happiness. Since then, her quarters had been surrounded by twice as many guards, and she hadn't appeared in any of the public areas of the station. The docking bay doors opened with a soft hiss, and the ethereal royal party began to emerge. First came the Imperial Guard, 20 warriors in ceremonial armor that looked like it was carved from moonlight. Then came the council members, elderly ethereals in flowing robes who moved with the dignity of ancient trees. And then came the Emperor himself. Jake had expected someone impressive, but Emperor Thalon was beyond anything he had imagined. He was tall even by ethereal standards, with silver hair that seemed to glow and eyes that held the wisdom of centuries. He moved like liquid grace, and every step he took seemed to make the very air around him shimmer. Behind the Emperor walked a young, ethereal male who could only be Princess Zara's intended husband. Lord Varric was handsome in the way that statues were handsome, perfect, cold, and completely without warmth. He surveyed the station with the expression of someone examining a particularly uninteresting piece of property. Where's the princess? Jake asked, scanning the group. There, Dr. Chen pointed. Princess Zara appeared at the rear of the procession, flanked by so many guards that Jake could barely see her. She was wearing formal court robes that covered her from neck to floor, and her hair was arranged in an elaborate style that made her look like a porcelain doll. But even from this distance, Jake could see the sadness in her violet eyes. The welcoming ceremony was held in the station's Grand Assembly Hall. Jake stood with the other human diplomats in their designated section, trying to look respectful. While his heart pounded with worry, the Emperor's speech was formal and polite, but there was an underlying coldness to it that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. We have come to address certain irregularities in the diplomatic process, the Emperor said, his musical voice carrying easily through the hall. It has come to our attention that proper protocols have not been observed. His eyes swept across the human delegation, and Jake felt like he was being examined by a particularly dangerous predator. However, the Emperor continued, we believe in the possibility of redemption. Therefore, we will remain on the station for 1 week to observe the humans and determine if they are truly capable of civilized behavior. 1 week, Jake felt his stomach clench. 1 week to prove that humanity deserved a place in the galactic community, while staying away from the one person on the station who made him feel like he belonged somewhere. After the ceremony, Jake tried to return to his quarters, but he was intercepted by Lord Varric and 2 Imperial guards. You are the human Thompson, Varric said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Jake replied, trying to keep his voice steady. I am Lord Varric of the Outer Territories. I am to be wed to Princess Zara within the month. Varroc's voice was as cold as his expression. I understand you have been bothering her. I've been talking to her, Jake said, about stories and gardens and what makes her happy. Happiness. Varroc repeated the word like it tasted bad. How very human. You seem to think that personal. Desires matter more than duty and honor. I think people should have the right to choose their own path in life, Jake said, his temper starting to rise. The princess's path was chosen before she was born. Varroc said flatly, she will marry me, unite our territories, and fulfill her obligation to her people. Your childish notions of choice and happiness are irrelevant. Has anyone ever asked her what she wants? What she wants? Varroc looked genuinely puzzled. She wants to serve her people. She wants to honor her family. She wants to do her duty. These are the only things that matter. You don't even know her, Jake said, unable to keep the anger out of his voice. You've never asked her about her dreams or her interests or what makes her laugh. You see her as a political treaty with legs. Varroc's pale eyes narrowed. And you see her as what? A conquest? A trophy to prove human superiority? I see her as a person. Jake said simply, a brilliant, curious, amazing person who deserves to be loved for who she is, not what she represents. Love, Varroc said the word with disgust, another human weakness. The princess has no need for such foolishness. Everyone needs love, Jake said, even princesses. Especially princesses. Varroc stepped closer, and Jake could see the cold fury in his eyes. Stay away from her, human. If you interfere with this union, you will answer to me personally. That evening, Jake sat in his quarters, staring at the wall and feeling completely helpless. Somewhere on the station, Princess Zara was probably being lectured about duty and honor by people who had never asked her what she wanted from life. And there was nothing he could do about it. A soft chime from his door interrupted his brooding. Jake opened it to find a young ethereal servant standing in the hallway, looking nervous. Sir Thompson, the servant whispered, I have a message for you. He handed Jake a small crystal disc and hurried away before Jake could ask any questions. Jake held the disc up to the light and watched as words appeared in the air above it, written in Princess Zara's elegant handwriting. Meet me in the gardens at midnight. I need to see you. Please be careful. Jake looked at the clock. It was already 11:30. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door, knowing he was probably walking into a trap but unable to care. If Princess Zara needed him, nothing else mattered. The botanical gardens were dark and quiet at midnight. The artificial sky showed a blanket of stars, and the exotic plants seemed to glow softly in the dim light. Jake made his way to their usual bench and waited, his heart racing with anticipation and worry. You came. Jake turned to see Princess Zara emerging from the shadows. She was still wearing her formal court robes, but her hair was loose around her shoulders, and there were tears on her cheeks. Of course I came, Jake said, moving toward her. Are you okay? You look upset. My father spoke with me today, Zara said, her voice shaking slightly. About my duty, about the wedding, about how I have been distracted lately. What did you tell him? I told him I needed time to think, Zara said. It was not the answer he wanted to hear. Jake reached out and gently touched her face, wiping away a tear with his thumb. What do you want to tell him? The truth, Zara said, leaning into his touch. That I have learned what happiness feels like. That I have discovered what it means to be seen as a person instead of a symbol. That I have fallen in love with a human who tells me stories and asks me what I want from life. Jake's heart stopped. You? What? I love you. Jake Thompson, Zara said, her violet eyes bright with tears and determination. I love your kindness and your curiosity and the way you make me laugh. I love that you see me as an explorer instead of just a princess. I love that you think I'm capable of choosing my own path. Jake pulled her into his arms, holding her close as she cried against his shoulder. I love you too. He whispered into her hair, more than I ever thought possible. They stood there in the starlight, holding each other like they could stop time, if they just held on tight enough. But eventually, Zara pulled back and looked at him with sad, determined eyes. Jake, I need to tell you something. Tomorrow, my father is going to announce my engagement to Varric publicly. The ceremony will take place in 3 days. 3 days? Jake felt like the air had been knocked out of his lungs. Unless, Zara took a deep breath. Unless I do something that has never been done in the history of my people. What? I could renounce my title, Zara said quietly. I could give up my claim to the throne, my inheritance, my family, everything. I could choose love over duty. Jake stared at her, understanding the magnitude of what she was suggesting. Zara, you can't. Your people, your family, your entire life is built around being a princess. My entire life has been built around being what other people wanted me to be, Zara said firmly. For the first time, I want to be what I want to be. And what's that? Happy. Zara said simply, I want to be happy. With you. Jake felt his heart breaking and soaring at the same time. But if you give up everything for me, what if you regret it? What if you wake up one day and realize you made a mistake? The only mistake would be letting fear keep me from choosing love, Zara said. Jake, I have been thinking about this for days. I would rather spend 1 year living my own life than 100 years living someone else's. Before Jake could respond, the sound of marching feet echoed through the gardens. They turned to see a squad of Imperial guards approaching, led by a furious-looking Kef. The next morning, Jake woke up to alarms blaring throughout the station. Emergency lights flashed in the corridors, and confused voices echoed from every direction. He rushed to his communication device and found dozens of urgent messages waiting for him. The first was from Ambassador Rodriguez, emergency meeting, conference room 7. Now, the second was from Dr. Chen. The ethereal delegation is in chaos. Something big happened. The third was from his mother on Earth. The news is saying a princess ran away. Are you okay? Jake's heart pounded as he threw on his clothes and ran through the station's corridors. Whatever had happened, he had a sinking feeling it was connected to his midnight conversation with Princess Zara. The human delegation's conference room was packed with panicked diplomats. Ambassador Rodriguez stood at the front, his face pale and his hands shaking slightly. Gentlemen, Rodriguez said as Jake burst through the door, we have a situation. At dawn this morning, Princess Zara of the Ethereal Dominion sent a formal declaration to every major news network in the galaxy. Jake felt his knees go weak. What kind of declaration? Dr. Chen activated a holographic display showing Princess Zara standing in what looked like her private quarters. She was wearing simple clothes instead of her royal robes, and her hair hung loose around her shoulders, but her violet eyes blazed with determination. My name is Zara, daughter of Emperor Thalon, her recorded voice said clearly. I am speaking to you today not as a princess, but as a person who has learned something important about choice and freedom. Jake's hands clenched into fists as he watched the recording. For my entire life, I have lived according to the expectations of others. Zara continued. I have followed protocols, honored traditions, and prepared to marry a man chosen for me before I was born. But recently, I have discovered what it means to be truly seen and valued for who I am, not what I represent. Oh no, Jake whispered. Therefore, Zara said, lifting her chin with royal dignity, I hereby renounce my claim to the throne of the Ethereal Dominion. I give up my titles, my inheritance, and my position in the royal family. I choose to live my own life, make my own decisions, and follow my own heart. The recording ended, leaving the room in stunned silence. She actually did it, Dr. Chen breathed. She gave up everything. The Emperor is furious, Rodriguez said, running his hands through his hair. He's demanding we turn over Jake immediately. He believes this is all part of some human plot to destabilize their government. It's not a plot, Jake said quietly. She made her own choice. A choice that's about to start an intergalactic incident, Rodriguez snapped. The ethereal fleet is mobilizing. 3 warships are already on their way to this station. Jake, what did you do? Before Jake could answer, the conference room door burst open. Lord Varric strode in, flanked by Imperial guards, his face twisted with rage. Where is she? Varric demanded. Where's the princess? We don't know, Rodriguez said, stepping protectively in front of Jake. We had nothing to do with this. Lies. Varrick's cold composure had completely cracked. This human seduced her, with his primitive emotions, and corrupted her mind. She was perfect before he poisoned her with his talk of choice and happiness. She was miserable before, Jake said, stepping around Rodriguez to face Varrick directly. She was a prisoner in a golden cage, and you were just another set of bars. Varrick's hand moved to the weapon at his side. You destroyed the most important political alliance in our sector. Hundreds of worlds depend on the stability that marriage would have provided. And what about what she wanted? Jake shot back. What about her happiness, her dreams, her right to choose her own life? She had everything. Varrick screamed. Power, wealth, status, honor. What more could anyone want? Love. Jake said simply, she wanted to be loved for who she was, not what she could provide. For a moment, Varrick looked genuinely confused, as if Jake had spoken in a foreign language. Love is a weakness, a distraction. It makes people do foolish things. Love is what makes life worth living, Jake replied. Without it, all the power and wealth in the galaxy is just an empty shell. Before Varrick could respond, another alarm began blaring throughout the station. A voice came over the communication system. All personnel to emergency stations. Unknown. Ship approaching the docking bay. Through the conference room's viewport, Jake could see a small, sleek vessel approaching the station. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Not quite human design, not quite ethereal, but something entirely new. That's not one of ours, Rodriguez said, studying the ship through binoculars. The ship docked smoothly, and everyone waited to see who would emerge. The airlock opened with a soft hiss, and Princess Zara stepped out. But she wasn't alone. Behind her came her younger brother, Prince David, followed by a group of young ethereals Jake didn't recognize. They were all dressed in simple traveling clothes, and they all had the same look of determined excitement in their eyes. She's not just running away, Dr. Chen said in amazement. She's leading a revolution. The group made their way through the station's corridors, and soon they arrived at the conference room. Princess Zara walked in like she owned the place, her head held high and her violet eyes blazing with purpose. Hello, everyone, she said calmly. I hope you don't mind the dramatic entrance. Emperor Thalon appeared in the doorway behind her, his face a mask of cold fury. Zara, you will return to your quarters immediately and prepare for your wedding ceremony. No, Father, Zara said, her voice steady and clear. I will not. You are my daughter. You will obey me. I was your daughter, Zara corrected him. Now I am simply Zara, and I have friends who agree with me that people should have the right to choose their own paths. She gestured to the young ethereals behind her. Meet the new generation of our people, Father. They've been watching the humans, learning about concepts like freedom and individual choice. And they've decided they want those things too, Emperor. Thalon's face went pale. You have corrupted them. I have inspired them, Zara said firmly. Just as Jake inspired me. She turned to look at Jake, and her expression softened. Hello, cutie, she said with a smile that made his heart skip a beat. Jake grinned back at her. Hello, beautiful. Miss me every second, Zara said. In the purple blush that had started, everything spread across her cheeks once again. Prince David stepped forward. Father, I support my sister's decision, and so do many others of our generation. We don't want to live in a world where love is considered a weakness, and personal choice is forbidden. You are children, Emperor Thalon said coldly. You understand nothing about duty and responsibility. We understand that duty means serving our people, not sacrificing our happiness for political convenience, Zara said. And we've learned that the strongest alliances are built on mutual respect and friendship, not forced marriages and fear. Jake stepped forward, taking Zara's hand. In his, Your Majesty, I know you think I corrupted your daughter, but all I did was ask her what made her happy. She figured out the rest on her own. She gave up everything for you, the Emperor said, his voice filled with pain. No, Zara said gently. I gave up a life that wasn't really mine for a chance to build something real, something better. Emperor Thalon looked around the room at the faces surrounding him. His daughter's determined expression His son's supportive smile, the excited faces of the young ethereals who had followed Zera. Finally, his gaze landed on Jake. You truly believe that individual choice is more important than duty to one's people? The Emperor asked. I believe that when people are free to choose, they usually choose to help others, Jake said. But they do it because they want to, not because they have to, and that makes them stronger, not weaker, Your Majesty, Ambassador Rodriguez interjected. Carefully, perhaps we could find a middle ground, a way to honor both tradition and individual choice. Emperor Thalon was quiet for a long moment, studying his daughter's face. You are truly happy with this choice? Happier than I have ever been in my life. Zera said softly. And you, human, the Emperor said to Jake. You understand that if you hurt my daughter, you will answer to me personally. Jake squeezed Zera's hand. I understand, Your Majesty, but I promise you, I would rather cut off my own arm than cause her pain. The Emperor sighed deeply. And for the first time since he had arrived, he looked less like a powerful ruler and more like a worried father. Very well. I cannot force you to return home, Zera. You have made your choice clear to the entire galaxy. Does this mean, Zera began hopefully, it means, the Emperor said with a small smile, that perhaps it is time for our people to learn about these human concepts of choice and freedom. If my own children believe in them, perhaps there is wisdom there that I have overlooked. Zera threw her arms round her father, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, Father. Thank you for understanding. I do not understand, the Emperor admitted, but I love you enough to try. Lord Varek, who had been standing in the corner looking increasingly furious, finally exploded. This is madness. You cannot simply abandon centuries of tradition because of one human's romantic nonsense. Actually, Prince David said with a grin, we can. That's what choice means.